Hi Year 12, we're down to our final two poems now. In today's lesson we are going to look at Vergissmeinnicht by Keith Douglas. Now before we begin to look at this, because in your unseen elements of the exam you're going to have to be using your working knowledge of major events, literary movements and things like that over time to inform your knowledge of the texts that you'll be given in the exam that you won't have seen before. And so I'd just like you to practice doing that by looking at the dates that you've been given for Keith Douglas's life, 1920 to 1944. Now you can work out that he died aged 24, but I wonder if you can work out, given the title of the poem and given those dates, what major event this poem might deal with. Okay, so before we talk a bit further about that, I would like you to complete your daily review. So you have 4 questions on the screen and I'd like you to pause the video now and answer those questions for me. Off you go. Okay, so question 1, what attitude towards desire is conveyed in After the Lunch? After the Lunch is our poem by Wendy Cope about a person who goes on a date and they feel like they're already falling in love with the person, but society would dictate that it would be too soon. So it's kind of a battle between the head and the heart. If you remember, she says the head does its best, but the heart is the boss. So the attitude towards desire that's conveyed by Wendy Cope is that we should follow desire, that it's stronger than societal expectations and than rational thinking, that we should always be led by and follow desire. How is this similar or different to Chopin's attitude towards desire? So as a reader of The Awakening, we're undoubtedly rooting for Edna to realise her love with Robert and for them to be able to be together. But society dictates that she should stay in her marriage to Leonce. And therefore Edna conveys a similar attitude, that it should be desire rather than society that leads our choices in love. Question 3, recall one moment from The Awakening that conveys Chopin's big idea about marriage. So for me, I would probably choose the moment where she tries to break her ring and she's unable to make a dent upon the little glittering circlet, which shows that Chopin recognises the oppressive nature of marriage in society. If we remember, the text itself is set in Louisiana, which was a Catholic state, which meant that once a person was married, they were bound together for all of eternity. And therefore, Chopin's big idea about marriage is that it can be a source of oppression and restriction. Which poems demonstrate a similar attitude towards marriage? So for me, my mind was instantly drawn towards the 2 poems set in the marital bed. So One Flesh by Jennings and also Talking in Bed by Larkin. Those 2 poems convey the idea that that over time the desire has gone from the relationships, but that marriage is a source of entrapment that keeps them together nonetheless. Okay, so moving on to today's poem then. Douglas is a well-known, well-renowned war poet of World War II. So World War II was the big event that I was trying to get you to think of in our beginning activity there. So Douglas was actually killed during World War II in the invasion of Normandy on the 9th of June 1944. And he was just 24 when he died, but is now regarded as one of the greatest British poets of the Second World War. And Vergissmeinnicht is one of his most celebrated poems. Vergissmeinnicht is German and it means forget-me-not. So next to your title in your anthology, I would like you to write down German for forget-me-not next to the title Vergissmeinnicht. And this should instantly signal to us as readers that this is not just a poem about war, but that it's potentially a poem about love as well. Okay, so I'm going to read the poem to you and then I'm going to ask you to pause the video and read through once on your own. Here is our poem. 3 weeks gone and the combatants gone, returning over the nightmare ground, we found the place again and found the soldier sprawling in the sun, the frowning barrel of his gun overshadowing. As we came on that day, he hit my tank with one like the entry of a demon. Look! Here in the gun pit spoiled the dishonoured picture of his girl who had put Steffi, Vergissmeinnicht, in a copybook Gothic script. We see him almost with content, abased and seeming to have paid, and mocked at by his own equipment that's hard and good when he's decayed. But she would weep to see today how on his skin the swart flies move, the dust upon the paper eye and the burst stomach like a cave. For here the lover and killer are mingled, who had one body and one heart, and death, who had the soldier singled, has done the lover mortal hurt. So pause the video and read through once on your own. Off you go. Okay, so we're going to look at moments of change in the poem a bit later on, but one thing I do want to draw your attention to is the changing rhyme scheme. So I wonder if, as well as reading through the poem on your own, you could also start to try and identify the rhyme scheme of the poem. So just as a quick reminder, we do that by labelling each new sound with a new letter. So gone, at the end of this line, would be given the letter A, ground, B, found, B, then sun and gone, partial rhyme, so we could still give it A, and then carry on and see if you can identify where the rhyme scheme seems to change. Off you go. Okay, so if we have a ABBA rhyme scheme in the first two stanzas, when we look at the next stanza, again we've got these partial rhymes of spoiling girl, not quite a rhyme but it could still work, so AA, Vergissmeinnicht and script B. But again then, it changes in the next stanza, content rhymes with equipment, paid rhymes with decayed, ABAB. I'll note that down. So it's always interesting to look at the changing rhyme scheme to help you to spot moments of change within the poem. Again, as I said, this is something that we can look at in more depth as we go through the lesson. Sorry, I've done that one wrong. A, B, B. There we go. Okay, and then finally the AB rhyme scheme mostly fits as the poem goes on. So in terms of what the poem is about then, the story of the poem if you like, the poem is about a British soldier who returns to the scene of a battle to find a dead soldier of the enemy side whose body is decaying in the sun. But beside the body he finds a photograph of the soldier's lover who has written Vergissmeinnicht. So the narrator of this poem, the narrative voice, is seemingly the poet himself, Douglas. And he remarks how the same soldier had tried to kill him, and he should almost feel happy that he's dead. However, a picture of the soldier's girl reminds him that the soldier is still a human and forces the reader to think about the effects of war on the innocent. So we are studying love through the ages. That's what paper this poem will be useful for. And so it's possible to read this as a poem that deals with society's impact upon love. So society has created the war, but in turn that has an impact upon love because lovers are separated through war. So we're now going to go through and I'd like you to annotate your poem, firstly just to listen to the explanations and then to pause after each annotation and note them down in your own anthologies. So I'm going to read a stanza again and then I'll talk through my annotations. 3 weeks gone and the combatants gone, returning over the nightmare ground, we found the place again and found the soldier sprawling in the sun. So the thing I would like you to pick out in a moment from this stanza is the metaphor nightmare. So this metaphor suggests that upon returning he's instantly reminded of the horrors of the battle. How awful the battle was is just brought to mind again. So pause the video and note that down. Off you go. Okay, second stanza. The frowning barrel of his gun overshadowing. As we came on that day, he hit my tank with one like the entry of a demon. So the gun is personified in that first line of the second stanza, the frowning barrel of his gun overshadowing. So this demonstrates the malevolent, the evil power of the gun. And the use of the verb overshadowing is quite interesting because it suggests that at the time of the battle, all Douglas could actually focus on was the immediate threat. Now, if you look at my notes on the bottom of the screen, Douglas actually describes his poetry as extrospective, sorry, that's hard to say, rather than introspective. Normally poetry is introspective and deals with emotions and emotional reactions to things, but Douglas describes his poem as extrospective, meaning that he focuses upon the eternal things that he can see and experience. And that's interesting because it suggests that at that moment, all he could see in front of him was the immediate threat of the enemy. And that idea is further explored through the simile, he hit my tank with one like the entry of a demon. So comparing the dead soldier to a demon positions the reader to view the soldier as an enemy and suggests to us that at the time of the battle, all Douglas could focus on was the extrospective, what he could see in front of him. And what he could see in front of him was an enemy soldier putting an immediate threat upon his life. So the first two stanzas are a reflection of the battle in which the soldier was killed. In the next two stanzas, Douglas moves to talk about something else. And the change in the poem, the volta, the moment of change, is signified by the verb look. So this starts for Douglas to have a look at something a little more closely and to change his view on what he can see. And it forces us as a reader to look closely at the enemy as well. And what we actually see, or what Douglas describes to us, is that upon closer looking, Douglas noticed a picture of the soldier's lover. So it forces us to look at the soldier as a human as well as just the enemy. So I'll read the full stanza. Look, here in the gun pit spoiled the dishonoured picture of his girl who has put Steffi, Vergissmeinnicht, in a copybook Gothic script. The use of the adjective dishonoured conveys Douglas's sympathy for Steffi, who would be the innocent in war. She's not fighting the war herself, but she's directly impacted by the war because her lover dies. The words forget-me-not seem to have a certain amount of irony because it's him who has died and she is the one left mourning the loss of the lover. But it could also suggest that they hoped that their love would endure the physical separation caused by war. So if you pause the video here and annotate those notes onto your copy of the poem. Okay, so stanza 4, I'll read it again. We see him almost with content, abased, and seeming to have paid and mocked at by his own equipment that's hard and good when he's decayed. So in this stanza, Douglas is trying to highlight to the reader the fragility of human life and how easily lovers can be separated by death in times of war. So the equipment that is supposed to protect and also arm the soldier actually outlives the soldier. It's still fine when the soldier's body starts to decay. Mocked at is interesting use of personification because it demonstrates that the soldier is more fragile than the equipment he carries. Okay, and our final two stanzas then. Here, Douglas again turns our attention towards Steffi, the lover of the soldier. And that change in focus is again signalled by the use of the connective but. But she would weep to see today how on his skin the swart flies move, the dust upon the paper eye and the burst stomach like a cave. So we have a really graphic image of the dead soldier now. And he looks at how Douglas should view the dead body as the body of an enemy, and he should almost be glad that they've killed the enemy rather than allowing the enemy to kill them. but then considers how the soldier's lover would view the body and how upsetting that image would be for her. And we're reminded again that she is the innocent lover who's left to mourn his loss. And his big idea is really shown through the final stanza. For here the lover and killer are mingled, who had one body and one heart, and death here the soldier singled, has done the lover mortal hurt. So this line demonstrates the human cost of war, that although to Douglas that soldier was the enemy, to someone else he was a lover. The contrast in lover and killer, because they're seemingly opposite, is interesting because, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what happened with my typing there, aft. It should say the fate. The fate of both remains the same. That although he loved Steffi, he was fighting in a war, and the lover and killer in him were both killed in the war. Looking at Douglas's big ideas then. So Douglas wrote this poem to recognise the human cost of war and to explore the effects of war and therefore society upon love, and to demonstrate that one person's enemy is another person's lover. But remember that we can't look at these poems in isolation. We have to understand the poems in their comparison to The Awakening. And one of the similarities is in the ideas about enduring love. So Douglas conveys the idea that Steffi continues to love the soldier in spite of the difference between them, and this could be compared to how Chopin shows that even though there's physical distance between Edna and Robert, Edna continues to love Robert even when he's in Mexico, as demonstrated through her various visits to Mademoiselle Rise, her asking of letters, and her longing to see him. But ultimately, the two texts can be comparable because of the impact upon love created by society. So both writers show that no matter how strong the love is, societal forces seem to be even stronger. So the war is what separates the lovers and causes the soldier's death, meaning that they're apart. And that's created by society. And similarly, Edna, and Robert cannot be together because societal expectations are so oppressive. And therefore both writers demonstrate that whilst love can endure distance, society seems to be much stronger in terms of breaking up lovers. Okay, thank you very much.